Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Pulling Together to Decolonize, Reflections on an Indigenous-led Open Resource Adaptation. I wanted to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands on which we call home. I'm grateful to be here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, on Treaty 1 territory and the shared traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Please take a moment to think of the land on which you are situated and envision a way that you can challenge racism, colonialism, and inequity. I'm Caitlin Schilling, and I'll be kind of moderating this morning's session. And I thought I would introduce all of our panelists. So if the panelists wanted to introduce themselves, maybe I'll start with Leah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leah LaPlante. I'm from Brandon, Manitoba, and I've been the Vice President in the Manitoba Métis Federation for 23 years. And I was just thrilled to be asked to be a part of this group.
Thanks, Leah. Susie?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm just a little distracted by all the. No, so my name is Susie McPherson Durendi. It's good to be with you this morning. I'm originally from Churchill, Manitoba. I'm Cree. That's Treaty 5. I currently reside in Treaties 1 and 2. For myself, it's all ancestral territory, regardless of what it's called. I'm one of the knowledge keepers at Brandon University, but I've also really been very fortunate to be a part of the Pulling Together committee, and just really honored to be a part of the community in many different ways. And I'm also the keeper of the Learning Circle at the Sandy Soto Spiritual Center. And so I just want to say Egwesani for having me here this morning. I look forward to our time together. Egwesani.
Thanks, Susie. Chris Lajamodi?
Hi, I'm Chris Lajamodier. I am the advisor to the president, the Indigenous advisor to the president, but previous to that new title, it's recently new, I was the director for the Indigenous Peoples Center here since 2016 for Brandon University. I'm Métis from the Red River Métis Nation. I've lived in Manitoba my whole life, moved around different communities. I worked at the University of Manitoba prior to moving to Brandon, Manitoba, and in that role, I was doing Indigenous student recruitment, traveling to Indigenous communities, First Nations communities, meeting with students, meeting with education counselors and teachers. And then that led me into my career at Brandon University and now within the president's office at Brandon University. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. Christy Charlie?
I'm Chris Charlie. I'm on Treaty 2 territory this morning, and thinking about that connection. And thank you for your opening, Caitlin. That was great. I have a strong lineage to the Red River settlement, Métis, and my grandmother was also Plains Cree Nahiawas from Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan. So I'm Indigenous, and I am grateful for the path that they led before I came on this land. And I'm the director of Indigenous education at Assiniboine Community College, and I too am grateful and thankful for the opportunity that I get to work with individuals and community such as we have on this panel today. So, miigwech.
Thank you. And Joan?
Good morning, everyone. I'm joining you as well from Treaty 2 territory, and also acknowledge that some of the folks who live in Treaty 2 territory are not covered by treaty. And just wanted to also acknowledge that my ancestors are uninvited settlers to the area from England, Scotland, and Ireland. And I've been absolutely privileged beyond measure to work with this incredible group of people on this project, and really happy to be sharing what we've learned together with everyone here today. Thank you.
So I'll give a little bit of a summary of the project, and then we'll move right into the panel questions. So the goal of this project was to adapt a resource for use in training non-Indigenous post-secondary faculty and staff on the history of Indigenous peoples in Manitoba, colonization and decolonization. We wanted to ensure that the process put Indigenous people in control of the content. The originally created in British Columbia as part of a larger indigenization project, the Pulling Together Foundations Guide provides a starting point for those who want to learn more about Indigenous people and those who wish to begin their journey of understanding Canada's colonial legacy. The Manitoba Foundations Group was very invested in the open nature of this project for a couple of reasons. The document itself is living in nature, so you can update it with new knowledge. And also, knowledge is meant to be shared, and we were all delighted that OERs are structured in this way. To tell you a little bit about the project process, I wanted to begin by sharing part of Anishinaabe artist Emery Knight's statement describing the front cover work, which you can see on this slide here. This statement really summarized how the process went along. So, the end of the birch bark canoe bleeds off the page to represent the space that there is for everyone on this journey. The river flows from the foreground to the background, from left to right, and ebbs back and forth to express the journey's path into the unknown and acknowledges the organic nature of it. The only way forward is together, guided by our grandmother and grandfather's teachings of the land. Here we go. So this open resource honored Indigenous knowledge, cultures, and ways of being while continually seeking to develop and nurture relationship with communities to ensure content was valued and culturally appropriate. It allowed both Indigenous and non-Indigenous contributors to learn together throughout the project. This circular chart shows the timeline of the project with the circle and corresponding colors representing the medicine wheel. We tried to disinvest from a linear project planning to allow time for reflection of information. The Manitoba Foundations Group itself had two working groups. So we had a smaller working group, which was responsible for guiding the larger group through facilitated discussions to go through each section of the resource. And then the larger group made up of elders and knowledge keepers, community members, and Indigenous organizations provided localized stories and knowledge and elicited insights from others within their community to accurately reflect the Manitoba region. Throughout the project, non-Indigenous collaborators learned to focus on building relationships and trust and to put the needs of Indigenous collaborators at the center of the project. With that in mind, before we move into our first question, I wanted to open the floor to the panelists to see if anyone wanted to share their thoughts on how our group process went overall. No pressure by any means.
Okay, it's Leah.
Leah.
I just refreshed my memory this morning. I had done an interview with CBC on Pulling Together, and I had an exuberant interviewer. And so they certainly do add a few words here and there, but I had a big smile this morning when I read it over again, because I'd missed it the first time, where he had put that Leah had thought that this was probably one of the most important jobs she had done in her career. And I guess I must have given him that impression, because I'm still pumped over being on this group and the work that we were able to do. And if I do look at the body of work I've done over all the years of being involved in the political world with the Manitoba Métis Federation, plus being a community member, I like to get in everywhere and have the Métis voice heard. When I think back of how easy it was to sit with this group of people, and the biggest thing for me was the Métis people, the First Nations people, the Inuit, we have hardly ever been able to tell our own story. And as a student growing up, I'm an over 65 or now, but as a student growing up in Manitoba, for instance, well, there was usually only 2 or 3 sentences in regards to any group of Indigenous people, and it had nothing really to do with those people. It was a statement made by someone else. So the beauty of this project to me was knowing that the end product was going to give Indigenous people the opportunity to tell their story, for probably for the first time for some of us, to be able to share what we know inherently about our history and where we should be going. So at the end of the day, it would be really hard not to say it probably is right up there in the top 5 projects I've ever been involved in, because there was a time when I didn't think we would ever get to tell parts of our own story. And I know for the future, for my grandchildren, for instance, I know it's going to be different than it was for me or my children, because Canada is in a place now with the horrid news about the children in the residential schools. Canadians, I think, are ready to look and learn with new information and really find out the story of their own country that they thought they knew, that isn't quite the way it actually was. So I just want to say that if I could pick again, I would pick a group just like this with the goal that we had, and I think we've accomplished it to a very large degree. So I thank Joan for inviting me to sit on this group. It's been important in my life.
Oh, that's great. And really leads into, like, beautifully, Leah, into the next question of reflecting on your experience throughout this adaptation. How did the process of working on this project differ from others that you have worked on? Opening the floor to anyone who wanted to jump in there.
My name is Susie McPherson Durende. As I said earlier, I was thinking about it being a more a collaborative process and a consensus, that it took the time to really connect relationally to the individuals that were there. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that there is an acknowledgement and an awareness for the need for this kind of document, for this kind of project to be here at this time. I think it's something we've been waiting for a long time, and I'm really thankful that it's specific to our Manitoba or our prairies context, because it really is important that we're thinking about those people that live in our communities and that are in our midst. One of the things I always think about is where do we want to go? What is the vision? And how are we going to get there? Is the current way of thinking and doing things going to get us there? And so I think this was an important project that answers that question. If we want to get somewhere different, we need to do something different. So this is a project that really engages each and every one of us personally, and calls on us to be committed to our own personal stories and what our personal reconciliation story is, and where it is right now, where it has been, and where it's going to go in the future, and how it's going to impact on not only our own lives, but the work in which, as we really seek in a deeply personal way about this, where we're at with it, how we'll take that and help others to come to that understanding. I really believe that if this knowledge is taken deep within each and every person that encounters it, that it will be an influence on others. It's going to have a ripple effect. I really have a lot of hope for that. So I'm very thankful. Egusan.
Joan or other Chris?
So from Brandon University again, I guess one of the ways that it differed from other projects. So quite often when you're working in post-secondary, so Chris DeJarlis, my counterpart at Assiniboine Community College, we have priorities for our institution where we are kind of pulled to try and, better our own institution or better the students or the experiences of our graduates that are going through our programs. And where this project may have differed a little bit is we kind of set that aside and we thought, what is for the betterment of everyone in our community, for our Indigenous community, for our faculty, for our staff. And that's where we thought this partnership just works. And I mean, I don't mean to skip over a few others. We actually collaborate on a few things here in Brandon, which is really great. But this project in particular, we also then included Indigenous organizations such as the Manitoba Métis Federation, the Manitoba Inuit Association, among others, Louis Riel Institute and a few others. And if you go into the guide, you'll be able to see a list of all of our partners. There's quite a few, but we couldn't have done it without that collaborative piece. We wouldn't have been able to do this project individually. And it's quite interesting because Brandon University, sorry, I'm getting feedback and I'm not sure if that's just me or someone else. So I got distracted there. Brandon University was going through its own process of, what resources are available for faculty and staff as a learning opportunity. And we went in with an open mind and we just happened to kind of target in on the Campus BC resource, the pulling together the original resource, and thought what would be a great opportunity to adapt this. And it just so happened at the same time, Campus Manitoba and Assiniboine Community College were also considering that. And we all just came together with open minds, open hearts, and just decided we wanted to go at it in a good way and not worry about, institutional priorities as much as what the outcomes and the relationships and that was more important to us as an outcome for this project. And just having it being open, even to our community and organizations. We've already been contacted by the newcomers associations in Brandon about, can we use this resource among other organizations? So it's just been a really great opportunity because it still continues to grow. That collaborative community is still growing in terms of how we're supporting each other and how we're engaging through this document, but then with each other through relationships.
Thank you, Chris. Joan or Chris with a hand?
I'd love to jump in here if I may. It's been, for me, this has been a really different experience. As someone who is a recent, I just completed my doctoral studies in 2019, and for me, all of my academic writing thus far has been very self-focused. It's been for my own benefit, my own career trajectory. And for me, because I wrote, part of what I wrote was on building allyship in my dissertation work. And I thought, it's time for me to start walking the walk instead of just sort of talking the talk. And so I thought, what forms of privilege do I have that I could leverage in the service of people who to whom I feel a responsibility when it comes to being a settler on this land. And so it became clear to me that there were the draw on resources right now for for Indigenous colleagues, for Indigenous students, for people who are in the post-secondary system now. They're being asked over and over again to be part of committees, part of sharing their knowledge constantly with us. And so was there a way that I could give back that was meaningful and that would have a much more outward looking focus rather than focusing on my own priorities. And so that became one of the reasons that I approached Chris Lajmodier initially and said, I have a sabbatical leave, which to me is just the very epitome of academic privilege. And how can I use that in a way that would be of benefit to the wider community? And so for me, this was a very different project in that way. The other way that it was really different was having to approach all of this work in an online environment. And so it really went against so much of what I'd learned about building relationship through protocol and ceremony. And I wasn't sure how we would pull that off. But the knowledge keepers and the folks from the community who have been part of this have been so wonderfully intentional about infusing their knowledge and their ability to create extremely powerful moments of ceremony and their knowledge through this online environment. And I think that it's amazing that we came through it with that infused through everything that we did.
Thanks, John. Chris?
I don't have much more to add other than what's been said. Chris touched on the stars aligning moment. I just find that so interesting. The coincidence that ACC had reviewed the guys out of BC in 2019 and had brought together elders and knowledge keepers to start looking at a cultural competency model for the college, and then connecting with BU and then Campus Manitoba, and realizing we're all thinking about at some point using the Pulling Together guide. I just, that's really stars aligning, universe providing this opportunity. And I'm impressed with Brandon, right, in our community, and that we can do some stuff like this, right, and that we can set those competitive natures aside and recognize what's for the greater good. And I think one of the other themes too is that whole notion of process versus product, right, and that with good intentions, with good meaning and big hearts and respect and humility throughout the process, you will get the product you were looking for. And so how we treat one another and how we have relationships, I recognize is how important that is in projects like this moving forward, right? And it's in embodying in an Indigenous worldview and understanding of things that helps us achieve that, right? So there was a bit of indigenization, decolonization, and reconciliation going on throughout this project, and so many learning opportunities for all of us involved. So yeah, I'm super grateful for that, and hopeful that it's not the last time we do something like this.
Absolutely. And on that note, our next question, what do you hope to see going forward when collaborating with Indigenous contributors on another open project like this? Or what advice might you give to colleagues looking to undertake a similar project like this? You want to start with Susie? Sorry to put you on the spot there, Susie.
Okay, can you just repeat that question again? Sorry.
Absolutely. What do you hope to see going forward when collaborating with Indigenous contributors on another project like this? Or what advice would you give to someone looking to do something similar?
I was thinking that we have a lot of knowledge, and that it really, I think what makes the difference in a project like this is that people have a knowledge and experience. We are Indigenous, we have Indigenous knowing and being and doing. It's not just a an intellectual activity, that it really is a holistic approach to doing something. And, you know, Chris mentioned the Indigenous worldview. And that's something that I think about always, is that we live in a predominantly Western worldview society. But as Indigenous people, it's important for us to really acknowledge and live from our own worldview in a Western worldview society. And so I think what I would suggest is to always strive for a balance, because we would still be limited in a certain extent, because societies, institution, organizations, and ways of doing things are the way they are. But it's important to consider how do we do things together in a good way that's going to result in something, in something for everyone. So, and the tendency is to look at this kind of project and think, there's many people who think that this is for Indigenous people. No, we've equally been impacted. Maybe Indigenous people have been more so impacted by colonialism, but colonial thinking impacts all of us. And it's evident in the way things are in society, that says the Western worldview way of doing things is where it's at, and Indigenous worldview and way of doing things is a thing of the past. It isn't, and there really needs to be a balance and a honoring and a validating of the knowledge that Indigenous folks can bring to these kinds of projects, but working together, finding a way to balance and honor each other. I like the quote that says, reconciliation is a win-win situation, and where each is honored and each gets to participate. It's reconciliation is not true reconciliation if it's at somebody else's expense. And so, Egusan.
Chris, I saw your hand up. Chris L.
I'm trying to jump in or interrupt. I just was maybe going to give Susie a little bit of time, but she said what I was thinking a lot more beautifully than I could. I was just going to say, you know, it's about respecting the process and building those relationships. That's the advice that I would give. We, as a group, I had mentioned how the stars kind of aligned, and that was Chris's term, but we all kind of were looking at the same resource. But even when we came together, we didn't prescribe and say, here's the resource we're going to use. We brought together knowledge keepers, Indigenous community members, and we just listened and we said, what is our Indigenous community looking for, and how can we help support that? And a few of us are members of the Indigenous community, so of course we had our own opinions there as well. But we provided the space for people to share that and share their experiences and the outcomes that they were looking for, of how we can share Indigenous knowledge and be respectful of Indigenous worldviews. Quite often in post-secondary or in educational systems, like Susie touched on, we're always looking at it from a Western perspective, and we went about it in a different way this way. It was community-led, Indigenous-led, and we respected everyone around the circle and approached the project that way. I think that was really important in the outcome and what we achieved with the adaptation for this project.
I agree. Chris, Leah, Joan?
I thought I saw her. I thought I saw Leah ready to talk there.
Yeah, I am actually. I'm sitting here looking at the question and listening to Susie and Chris. And one of the things that I hope to see going forward is to encourage our own Indigenous people to take advantage of the work that's been done in this book. One of the things in our Indigenous communities has, and I'll speak to the Métis component, but I'm guessing it would be very much the same in First Nations or Inuit. I can remember asking my grandma lots of questions when I was a teenager, and she was very leery of answering any of them, and she was carrying with her a learned behavior, which was, and I found out after, just keep your mouth shut, put your head down and people will leave you alone. And some of our people still carry that with them and think that's the way it's supposed to be. But as I got older and I started doing my own genealogy to find out exactly what it meant to be Métis and where I came from, I began to understand that we had a beautiful history. And my grandma envisioned it as something bad and never would tell the stories. And then while I was doing that, my grandfather and my grandmother had passed away. And a lot of the questions I had, they could have answered. They had all of the answers, and yet they were reluctant to share them even with their own grandchildren. And I think that's so sad. So speaking to what Susie was saying about, the knowledge that we have, long-standing knowledge, the blood memory, all of those things that we talk about, we need to encourage not only other Canadians, but our own families to get more into understanding and releasing and letting go of some, important stories and worldviews that they shared. So I see this as something that's valuable to all Canadians, not just other than Indigenous people, but to all Canadians and Indigenous people, because I'm certain that we could have done a book, all of us Indigenous people could have done a book of stories just if our aunties and uncles and grandparents would have talked about what they knew from generations past. So I think this is a very positive thing, and that we will engage as many as possible. And I do hope we do something, Chris, something else going forward, to just encourage everybody to get to know the true story in Canada.
Thank you, Leah. Absolutely. Chris, Joan?
Well, I'll just add, like, everything Leah said, everything is said, like, and everything that Susie said so poetically. And in addition to that, this was a textbook, and we talk a lot about how learning has to go off the page, and we're talking about open projects, but also thinking about how how do we build cultural awareness? How do we act, like, how do you actually get to those learning outcomes that we so desperately need, right? I mean, we can give people this information, how it gets used and who it gets delivered by and all those types of questions. That's an exciting opportunity, right? And an opportunity again for our knowledge keepers and elders to bring their great ideas on what that looks like, because you're not going to become an ally or know how to indigenize your life or whatever, even if that matters, by reading this textbook. But this textbook is a fantastic start, and it has the information, like the foundation you need to start building that awareness. But then what does that start to look like, right? And is it engaging in ceremony? Is it holding sharing circles? Is it self-reflection, going to doing land-based teachings, taking in a sweat? There's so many other things that I think need to happen, and that we look forward to working with knowledge keepers and elders on those parameters, I guess, for lack of a better term, on those, on how it gets delivered, the method and the way and how we measure it from an Indigenous perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Joan?
I think for me, the important thing, working at Brandon University, I have a lot of opportunities to engage with Indigenous colleagues, Indigenous students. And I think my biggest piece of advice for other folks who are looking at approaching a project like this, as a non-Indigenous person, I think really the first step is engaging with community, getting to know people and building relationships ahead of time. I can't imagine going into a project like this not knowing people. I was fortunate to be well acquainted with a number of the people on the committee before we began working, and that relationship that we built ahead of time was really integral in me feeling that I had a place at the table, and that that we started from a foundation of at least at that initial trust going forward. And for folks who are engaging, I know sometimes non-Indigenous people are really afraid of engaging just from a fear of offending or a fear of you know, slipping up or making a mistake. And really, what matters more than that is that you approach with humility and respect, and that you have a good heart and be willing to learn. And inevitably we will all make mistakes, and that's not what's important. What's important is just recognizing that you've made a mistake, and then making it right, and then moving forward, because it's really what's important is, you know, we've got wonderful opportunities to work on great projects together, and it's just, I think that we just need to get over that fear, that initial fear, and part of the way of doing that is using resources like the one that we've just built. But more importantly, as Chris has said, and as many of the other folks have said, being out there and part of the community, getting to know people personally, and building those relationships, so that when we do come together and engage, we've got, we already have that mutual respect, and that we're looking at doing things for the same purpose. And I think that that's really key.
I agree. One note, I hope everyone who reads it gets as much out of it as we did. Not to speak for anyone, but I found that, touching on something Susie said about kind of changing the way you think, working on this project, absolutely. There was the content itself, but also the relationships throughout all of the meetings. That's the piece that really changed how I thought about how the project process went as a whole, and it was really good. So I hope everyone enjoys it as much as we did. Before we hop into some question and answers, I wanted to share one last quote, that one of my favorite quotes, and I really think sums up everything that all of you have mentioned. It's from Anishinaabe author Richard Wagamese. "We are story, all of us. What comes to matter then is the creation of the best possible story we can while we're here. You, me, us, together. When we can do that, and we take the time to share these stories with each other, we get bigger inside. We see each other, we recognize our kinship, we change the world, one story at a time." And hearing that thought, I put that quote in earlier, and then Leah, you had mentioned stories, and I thought, oh, that's perfect. So I'll stop, and if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat. If not, I'll throw some questions in at you all. See, Brianne mentioned that she has shared the book with the University of Winnipeg, and people are really excited and grateful for the work. So thanks to all who contributed in every way. I guess one question that I have for all of you, what did you feel like the biggest challenge throughout this project was? If there was any.
The online piece. That everything was online, you know, that we were able to pull it off, I think speaks to the people that were involved, right? But most of us, I mean, certainly me, I feed off the energy in a room with people, and you know, I don't have any regrets. I don't lament. I wish we could have had more face-to-face meetings for sure through this. So the fact that we were able do this in the time we did and still build the kinds of meaningful relationships we have. Like, again, like it speaks to the people involved, but that was pretty trying as the months went on.
Know if this was much of a challenge or a realization as we worked together, but one of the things we found, and if you notice the title says Brandon Edition, pulling together Brandon Edition, was just making sure we reined it in and came at it from a local context. There's a lot of diversity with Indigenous community, whether you're in Western Manitoba, Eastern Manitoba, Northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So as we started looking at content, there was so much we could have put into this resource. And I know that some of our readers are looking for that information, but we just had to, sometimes simplify, or we had to say that's a really great information, and maybe we'll table that for a follow-up resource or something. But just making sure we were concise and accurate of the information we wanted to share. We weren't able to include everything in this book, so we actually left opportunities there for potentially Winnipeg or Northern Manitoba or other people to also make adaptations to this resource as well. It was part of a little bit of a challenge for us.
Yep. Manisha asked, did you adapt the book in Pressbooks platform? What was the cost to use this platform, or you all worked on a shared Google Doc? I guess, Joan, if you wanted to take this one.
Sure. So initially, because we didn't have, one of the problems that we found and working in Pressbooks, one of the initial problems that we came up with was that Pressbooks wanted us to put a title on the work before we were even really, before we could put anything into it. And we found very quickly on that we weren't comfortable with settling on a title until we were more familiar with the content of the resource. So initially what we did to overcome that problem and to kind of decolonize the process, because we didn't believe that putting a title on was appropriate for this project, we began by putting it in Google Docs and granting access to everyone who was on the committee. And that way we were able to work on the document and facilitate that happening. And then we transferred it into Pressbooks at the end of the project. That's when we put it into Pressbooks, once we'd settled on a title, once we were pretty confident with the content, then we moved it into Pressbooks. And we worked very, very closely with Campus Manitoba, who were wonderful throughout the project and really were really the most magnificent hosts for the project, and were really invested in seeing us be able to bring it even into workshopping through the Rebus community, which has been just an invaluable resource to us. And that's what's made it possible. But yeah, we started off in Google Docs just because it was a comfortable platform for everyone. It allowed people to engage more fully, and then we transferred into Pressbooks near the end.
Can you speak to the process of creating this wonderful resource? Yeah, we touched on it a little bit, but basically what we did was we broke into 2 working groups, and within that Google Doc, what we did was the smaller group would meet and kind of say, okay, let's work on section 1. And what we do was, when we go back to the larger group, ask for feedback and kind of let the larger group sit with that for a bit, and then we'd come back and reevaluate every time. If anyone else wanted to touch on that a little bit, by all means.
Yes, just to clarify, the smaller group was basically the 6, maybe a few others around in this presentation. The larger group consisted of those other organizations we mentioned, the Indigenous organizations, Indigenous community, knowledge keepers. And I saw someone had posted in the chat before about knowledge keeper, who determines who's a knowledge keeper. Just to clarify, some Sometimes the term elder is used, sometimes the term knowledge keeper. It's quite common here in Brandon and in Manitoba where we've shifted to knowledge keeper. Not everyone who is elderly has traditional knowledge, and traditional knowledge is typically recognized by community. I think they had asked, like, who determines if you have traditional knowledge? So typically you're recognized within community as being a knowledge keeper. And then that way, not everyone has the same knowledge as well. There's different teachings and different ceremonies, and so that's what I was talking about that diversity as well. But I don't know if Susie wanted to speak to that point, but just wanted to touch on that question too.
Thank you, Chris.
One of the things that I would like to add to that is that, when it's not only in just getting the project done, in getting the work done, it's the process of how that is done. I think about Indigenous methodologies and Western ways of gaining knowledge and information. The practices are different. The ways of doing things are different. And so I kind of found that thinking in terms of Indigenous methodologies was important to this. And so I think, we tend to try to just get things done. And I think, there was a limited, there was some time limits on getting this done, but I think to include the voices of as many as possible. My thinking, if I think of a challenge, I think if we were in non-COVID time, I wondered if there could have been some talking circles or town hall conversations or whatever with people that would have added to. I bring a sense of what my experiences are with different places and community that I'm involved in. But there are other experiences as well that could have contributed, and I think we did really well with what we had. But there's always other ways, and so I think about the value of focusing on the process. I really like what Joan said about relationships, and I put Joan, with her relationship, she had a connection already, and the involvement, the engagement, the inclusion, and all those things just builds on that connection. I sense that in not only Joan, but in other conversations that I've had together with other people. So just to not forget about, just not to focus on the end product, but in the process of getting it done is really important as well. Exactly.
I think one of my challenges was that is recognizing that through COVID and like many of the people that we were asking to give of their time and to give of their expertise and their knowledge, were so engaged with trying to support people within their own community with COVID. And so at times, we were up against not so much deadline, but I think there was we all felt a sense of urgency that this work is important and that we wanted to have something available to our university community. And knowing kind of that the folks that we were asking to contribute sometimes were folks who already had so many things on their plate and so many people that they were trying to serve, and that we were another sort of another request that was coming across their desk, and just trying to balance that with our own sense of urgency and wanting to have a completed project, because we know that people really need this content and that people were really I think there's a real urgency around trying to learn more about decolonization and to respond in ways that are actionable, and not just in terms of like, it's not just an intellectual exercise. We, with the discovery of unmarked graves and the mounting numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and men, and there's a real, I think there's a growing recognition amongst Canadians of all ethnicities and all backgrounds that we need to move beyond just talking about and studying the problem, and it's time for us to be engaged together and moving forward in action. And so we're trying to balance that need with the needs of recognizing that the folks that we're asking for to be contributors are the ones who are most engaged in community, trying to help people through these the times and the continuing effects of colonization.
We have a few minutes left, and there's one last question here. Do any of you plan to take this project and remix it into anything else? Or are there other cool projects like this in the work? Is your demographic wide open, or did you have a certain college class / professional development in mind?
I can start with that, I guess.
Yes, please.
So, the guides themselves, and there are more than one. There are, I think at this point, there are 6 guides in the Pulling Together series. And the first one which is the one we revised, it can be universally applied to any organization, institution, individual. So it's not as geared specifically to post-secondary or staff and students as some of the other guides. And so there is a lot of opportunity, I suppose, in the other guides to adapt and revise those to address specific needs in post-secondary. And that's certainly something that we're interested in doing. So there is a guide for leaders, there is a guide for curriculum developers and frontline workers, so on and so forth. So very interested in that, I would say. But this one really was for that foundation. It could be for students, it could be for newcomers, it could be for some folks that might be working for our institutions for onboarding, right? Like orientation sort of purposes. That was sort of our hope with the guide. And then additionally, I would love to see the Pulling Together guide considered for an open online educational opportunity, right, in Manitoba, and potentially having cohorts of groups of individuals throughout the province learning together through that, similar to what they have with in BC or Alberta from when it's business education. So that would be a dream, potentially manifesting through work with the Manitoba Indigenous Blueprint Committee. Who knows? But I'll let others chime in. But I really want to thank everybody for the invitation. And again, it's great to see everybody that we worked on the project with together.
Yes, thank you. I see your time is up, but can hang back for a few minutes, and if anyone wants to pop on and answer a question, feel free. But other than that, thank you all very, very much. And thank you very much to Joan, Chris, Leah, and Susie for joining me today. It's very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Want to stick around? You can stick around for another 15 minutes. Our captioners can go ahead and go. I'm gonna go ahead and make one of you guys the host, so if somebody wants to stick around. So give me a second just to do that. Caitlin, is it okay if I make you the host?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, if anyone panelists have to get going, please let me know, and that's a-okay. I'll stick around, and if anyone has any questions.
Hey, well, I gotta go, Caitlin. It's great to see you, though.
It was great seeing you, Chris. Take care.
Caitlin, there was a question in the chat about how long it took us to accomplish this project. I don't know if the name's still here. It doesn't look like it. We were lucky to benefit from the work out of BC, the resource that BC had created first. But if I was putting a time and estimating a timeline in terms of the work of this committee, so internally, we all probably started this work for about a year, maybe internally within our own organizations before we came together. And then by the time we came together using the existing resource, probably another year by the time we were meeting, I believe, bi-weekly, or I think it was bi-weekly, or was it weekly? Anyway, and we had the smaller group who was coordinating, okay, here's a section we want the larger group to work on. And then we would meet with a bigger group and ask questions. We had a Facebook page. We tried to be as accessible for sharing as possible. So Facebook, emails, we would set up meetings, phone calls. Caitlin and another person who we work with would follow up with people and give reminders through emails in terms of here's content we're looking for. That whole process took about a year, and Joan had touched on, we had our own ideas of timelines and we had set some of our own dates, and we missed those dates, but we needed to be respectful of the partnerships that we were asking to participate in this process, which then did push those dates a little bit. But like we had talked about throughout this, the whole process was very important, and more than meeting our own imposed timelines, we wanted to make sure the content was done in a good way, and that people who use this resource now get the learning that we had intended when we were creating this. So the other nice piece is, we did launch this, but we have the ability to go in and adapt as we go. So if we have opportunity for people to give feedback through surveys, or when they complete sections, or even just email us if there's things they think are missing, or just comments and things, and we can go right in on the back end, edit it live, and the manual continues to evolve that way.
I think Chris Desjardins once referred to this as kind of like having a baby. Like, it's really been the intense part of the work really ramped up over the last 9 months. So I think that it's kind of interesting that it kind of fell along that 9-month timeline. It very much felt like sometimes almost like kind of growing and nurturing something, and then finally giving it life at the end. And for me, there were just so many points where it started to feel real. And one of those points for me was when Emery put the artwork in place. It just solidified that all of the pieces that we were so intentional about were brought to life in that artwork. And it symbolized a big turning point for me. And there were times and stages where things got really and the nerd in me celebrated the day that we got our ISBN number. That was another big day, so and again, it was just through all that collaboration with Campus Manitoba and with the other partnerships that just made all of those things happen.
I agree. I just saw that Chris had another meeting, so he had to step out. But yeah, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free. If not, I'll just stick around while everyone leaves. And thank you very much. This is really great.
Yep, seeing some friendly names there from Campus Manitoba. You guys rock.
Thanks.
Hey, Dylan.
Good job. Great to see it.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Oh, can't hear you, Carly. No, you're not coming through, hun. No. Okay, all good. Oh, Don Dean